All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Torah Studies. This is our weekly Spelunk cave exploration. This is our weekly deep dive, scuba style deep dive into the Torah portion of the week. Torah portion this week is Balak, and I'm telling you, tonight's class, this is going to be off the charts. What we're going to cover tonight is literally off the charts. You are going to be amazed and thrilled by the conversation. So let's jump right in. The way we're going to do this is I want to give a very quick overview of the major events of the Torah portion, and then we're going to dive in, as we always do, into a very specific storyline, and then go deeper and deeper and peel back the layers of the story until we walk away with some very personal and actionable lessons. Okay, so here we go. So let's set the stage. Torah portion, again, is Balak. Balak was the king of a nation called, what was the nation? The nation, oh, I hear Yaakov. Literally hear my voice behind the door. Thank you. All right. Okay, so he was the king of the nation of Moab. He was a Moabite king, and the Jewish people were approaching the land, or approaching the border of the land of Moab. Again, just to set this in context, this is at the end of the 40 years of wandering. The Jewish people are making their final approach to the promised land. And, you know, if you want to get from point A to point B, and point B being the land that will become the land of Israel, you got to go through some lands. Yaakov, your favorite. You got to go through some lands. You got to go through some other territories, or at least alongside other borders. Last week, we spoke about if you recall, we spoke about the ambush at Arnon. Remember that? Remember the ambush? Remember the joke? Bacon tree?
Yeah.
Oh, everyone wants to forget that joke. Anyway, so this week, they're getting close to Moab, and the king of Moab has a problem. And what's the problem? Problem is that he's afraid that the Jewish people are going to attack, and he's afraid for his own nation sovereignty, even though he had nothing to worry about. Nonetheless, that is his fear. By the way, why didn't he have anything to worry about? So we know that Ammon and Moab, God had told the Jewish people not to touch them, not to. They're not going to go in. They're not going to conquer. Nothing. They're not going to take any of the land, etc. They were not. They were not in danger whatsoever from the Jewish people. Nonetheless, they feared. So what did they do? So many of the nations, as we read about in these Torah portions, several of the nations attacked the Jewish people or come out in force. Moab, with the king of Moab is Balak. The Torah portion is named after him. So Balak decides on another strategy. What's his strategy? Instead of going to physical battle against the Jewish people, he decides that he's going to fight spirit with spirit. And he figures, look, what's the key to the Jewish people's success? It's God, spirituality. It's Moses, who's a prophet. So I'm going to hire another prophet. I'm going to hire an evil prophet, or a for-profit prophet. You see what I did there? Anyway, a for-profit prophet. This guy will use his spiritual powers and his mouth as well. You know, Hakoko Yaakov, Jacob, the Jewish people are marked by the voice, not the reality show, but by the ability to study and pray, etc. So let's get a guy from the other side, from the dark side, who also uses his voice to curse the Jewish people. And he hires a fellow named Balaam. Balaam, the evil prophet for hire. Okay. Basically a verbal mercenary, and the king Balak hires Balaam, a lot of B names here, to curse the Jewish people and to try to bring about their downfall that way through the curse. By the way, before we continue the story, I got to tell you, and I think I mentioned this recently, but the crazy backstory, who Balaam was. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this in another class at some point, but nonetheless, Pharaoh had three advisors. What do I mean by three advisors? When Pharaoh was struggling years earlier with the Jewish, with what he thought of as the problem with the Jewish people, too many Jews, etc. So he had three advisors that he consulted with. They were Balaam, Job, and Jethro. Those were his three advisors.
The same Job as
the same Job as the guy who had unfortunate circumstances. Yes. Same guy.
And Yitro as in Moses' father-in-law?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. They all had lived in Egypt.
Famous dudes.
They were famous dudes, powerful dudes, spiritual dudes, like big machers, right? Big guys. 3 advisors of Pharaoh. Pharaoh calls them in and says, here's the problem, or what he perceives to be the problem. What should we do about it? Balaam says, throw the Jewish boys into the Nile River, right? Which is what ultimately happened. Jethro said, how could you? How dare you? That's a terrible idea. That's a horrific idea. What are you talking about? Infanticide? Or killing babies? Who does that? And Job was silent. Pharaoh went with the opinion or with the suggestion of Balaam. Jethro ran away because he said, either because he felt that Egypt was so corrupt and Pharaoh was so corrupt, or because he was hunted, because Pharaoh wanted to get rid of him because he didn't give the advice that he had wanted him to give, or he didn't sign off on the plan that he wanted him to sign off on. And Job kept his position, but he remained silent. So we know that Job ends up suffering. Jethro ends up moving to a place called Midian, becoming a priest there, a big macher there, and then ultimately the father-in-law of Moses, his daughter Tzipporah, which will be relevant to our story today. His daughter Tzipporah marries Moses, it's Moses' wife. And Balaam, I don't know, I guess he was a cabinet member by Pharaoh. Somehow he got out before the whole house of Egypt came crashing down. And here he resurfaces again 40 years later after the Exodus. And here he is trying to curse the Jewish people. Oh, so the narrative of the Torah portion is the parasha says that Balaam goes multiple times on top of a mountain, top of a hilltop, looks down upon the Jewish people and tries to curse them. And every time he opens his mouth, God transforms the curses into blessings. And some of the most beautiful things ever said about Jews are said by this guy, Balaam, who's trying to curse the Jewish people. In fact, in our morning prayers, we say, Matovu, O Halechi Yaakov, Mishkan Yisrael. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling place of Israel. That prayer refrain, or that line, comes straight up from the Torah portion, from the curse turned blessings of the evil prophet Balaam. So he's not a good guy, but God made sure that he didn't curse the Jewish people. But what happens next? After he, for the 3rd and final time, oh, by the way, also there are messianic, some of the greatest messianic prophecies are from the blessings of Balaam. But after he concedes his inability to curse the Jewish people to the fellow Balak, the king who hired him, he says to the king, I'm sorry. I told you from the beginning, I can't say as a prophet, I can only say what whatever God, sorry, Danny. I can only share what God has put in my mouth. So he concedes defeat, but privately, the Torah does not record this part. But the way our sages tell it, he goes in conversation to Balak and he says, look, I can't curse them. There's one thing that their God, the Jewish God, does not like, or a few things. Number 1, idolatry. Number 2, immorality. And if you can mix the two, that's the way to bring down the Jewish people. And so Balak sends the young women to entice the Jewish men into sin. And as our sages tell it, before the men were permitted, as it were, to continue with the action of sin, they were told you first have to pledge your allegiance to the whatever deities, the Baal Pa'ar that they worshipped, the idolatry, the idol that they worshipped. And when the men did this, so they were now guilty of immorality and idolatry, and that certainly was not a good thing. So here's where we pick up the story. Give me a second, Sindri, and I'll ask you to read this in a second. But first,
2/3 of a trifecta.
they almost had the trifecta, murder. By the way, is there a tradition that they also murdered? I don't remember, but they were doing pretty well with the nefariousness. Well, but that's not one of the biggest ones. Not saying that that's okay, but okay. 1 second. Give me a second. I need to find this. Here we go. Okay, text number 1, Sandrine, please take it away.
Israel was living in Shittim, and the people began to engage in licentiousness with the daughters of Moab. They invited the people to the feast offering of their gods, and the people ate and prostrated themselves to their gods.
Interesting. 1 second. It does say ate. So Yaakov, to your point, it does talk about how the eating was part of it. I had forgotten that it says that, so that there is a mention there. Continue, please.
Israel became attached to Baal Peor, and the wrath of God was inflamed against Israel. God said to Moses, "Take all the leaders of the people and hang those who sin before God facing the sun, so that the inflamed wrath of God may withdraw from Israel." Moses said to the judges of Israel, "Each of you kill his man who has become attached to Baal Peor." Behold, one man of Israel came and brought a Midianite woman near to his brethren before the eyes of Moses and before the eyes of all Israel, and they were weeping at the tent of meeting doors. Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, saw, and he arose from the community and took a spear in his hand. He went after the men of Israel into the tent and pierced both of them, the Israelite man and the woman, through her abdomen. The plague against Israel ceased. Those who died in the plague were 24,000.
Thank you. I mean, it's a crazy story, right? That's wild. So we have here the sin of idolatry, the sin of immorality. They're eating and feasting and engaged in such Jewishly abominable behavior. And Moses said to the judges, let's remember the plot here. In verse number 5, basically says these people are guilty of what, according to Jewish law, capital crime. Idolatry is a capital crime. It's so execute the people involved. So now one man, verse 6, one man of Israel comes and he brings a Midianite woman. Now, what's going on here? I have to explain, because you read the Torah, the text itself, and it doesn't give you the full story. It gives you the basics, but it's filled in by the Midrash and the Talmud and the commentary. So here's what happened. Apparently, the vast majority, if not all of the Jewish men who were sinning with these Midianite women, young women, and the idolatry and committing idolatry, were from the tribe of Shimon. Simon? Whatever, Shimon, which is the Hebrew. Easier for me to do that, right? Tribe of Shimon. Why Shimon? I don't know, but there is an indication that the commentaries point out, and I think even the Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud points out, when you look at the census numbers, the count of the tribes, because the Torah tells us how many Jews were from each tribe. When you look at the census numbers before this episode and the census numbers after this episode, you see a major drop in one of the 12 tribes, the tribe of Shimon. It's like almost half of that tribe, of the men from that tribe, are gone, and so that leads the sages to conclude that it was very likely that most, if not all, of those who sinned from the tribe of Shimon. So what happens is that the leader, the Nasi, the head of the tribe of Shimon, he's the one. When it said that a man came before Moses with a Midianite woman, this was the prince or the leader of the tribe of Shimon, who's trying to defend his tribe mates or whatever, his tribe, and say, hey, listen, not so guilty. And he comes before Moses with this woman. Ultimately, Pinchas ends up, Phineas, but that's Pinchas in the Hebrew. I'll just use the Hebrew. Pinchas ends up taking Phineas and Ferb, taking the life of that man, that Jewish leader, and the Midianite woman, who were engaged in, according to the commentary, according to the sages, actually at that moment engaged in sin. But again, it wasn't just immorality, it was also idolatry, etc. What exactly went down? So the Talmud fills in more detail. This is text 2a. Again, this is, you got to see this for yourself. Text 2a, Yaakov, please read.
I have a question on number 4.
Yeah.
Sentence 4, it says, those who sin before God facing the sun.
Take all the leaders of people and hang. No, I think it's hang those who sin before God facing the sun. I think hanging is facing. Now, why facing the sun? Honestly, I don't know. We would have to look up the commentaries to see the implication of it. But let's read 2a, because this tells us a little bit more about the showdown that happens with the tribal leader of Shimon, who comes to Moses with this Midianite woman. His name was Zimri. Her name was Cosby. Take it away.
What did Zimri do? He arose, gathered 24,000 of Israel, and went to Cosby, princess of Midian, and said to her, submit to me. She said to him, I am the daughter of a king, and so my father commanded me, submit only to the greatest of them. He said to her, I too am the head of a tribe. Moreover, I am greater than Moses, as I am the second of the womb. I descend from Shimon, the second son of Jacob, and Moses is the third of the womb. He descends from Levi, the third son of Jacob. Zimri seized her by her forelock and brought her before Moses. He said, Son of Amram, is this woman forbidden or permitted? And if you say as she is forbidden, who permitted the daughter of Jethro to you? The halacha eluded Moses.
So that was the show that, continue. Yeah, next page.
Well, that's a good question.
All the leaders bawled in their weeping, and this explains that which is written, and they wept at the tent of meeting's door. And it is written, therefore, and Phinehas, son of Eleazar, saw.
Okay, so basically the Talmud, again, this is from the Talmud. You can see it right there, source of text to a tractate Sanhedrin. The Talmud says, here's what happened. We just read it, but I'll just quickly summarize. Zimri, the leader of Shimon, comes before Moses, and before really he gathers a lot of Jews in general, and he says, listen, is this, and he take Cusby, grabs her and comes before Moses, is she permitted to me? And if you say she's not, then who permitted the daughter of Jethro? And Moses is silent, and everyone's crying because Moses doesn't have the answer. And meanwhile, Pinchas pulls out the spear, and he takes matters literally into his own hands, and he ends the plague right there and then with an act of zealotry. Okay, there's so much to unpack in the story, but I want to focus on one detail, and that is the accusation leveled against Moses by Zimri. Again, Zimri is the leader of the tribe of Shimon, and he brings this Midianite woman, and he says to Moses, she permitted or not, and if not, then who permitted your wife to you?
Because they were not Jewish.
Your wife, one second, your wife, sorry, not your wife. Well, you would say to Moses, your wife was also a Midianite.
Yeah.
Right? Because I mentioned, so Jethro was one of the advisors in Egypt, but then when it got kind of hot over there, so he ran away to Midian. He became a Kohen, a priest, not a Jewish priest, but whatever, a pagan priest in Midian. Moses goes there because he also has to escape Egypt at some point because he saved the Jew from the Egyptian who's beating him up and kills the Egyptian. So he also has to run away. He goes to a well because where else do you go? You go to the watering hole. He meets Tzipporah, this young woman over there, and they get married. And so here you have now, decades later, literally decades later, you have now this Zimri saying, "Look at you! How did you marry this young woman?" So I heard you say, Toba. I heard you say before. That's a good question. That's a good question. I also heard that Yaakov had an answer, but before that. We're gonna see the answer. Text 2b in a second. So again, the question is, look, if marrying someone from an idolatrous nation like Midian, if marrying an idolatrous woman is forbidden, and that's why we can't be with her, and that's why this plague is breaking out. So Moses, how did you marry a daughter of a pagan priest? You did the same thing. Now, what's the answer? What was the answer that you gave?
I don't remember giving it, but Moses did not worship idols because of his.
Okay, so
that religion.
So you could say that Moses wasn't influenced by her. He didn't.
She was influenced by.
Okay,
her.
fine. That's one answer. What's another answer? Let's take a look at text 2b. Text 2b. Give me 1 second. Yaakov, please read this one as well because it's within the 2 family. Take it away.
Who permitted the daughter of Jethro to you? Moses had married before Mount Sinai, and when the Torah was given, and they were all non-Jews who entered into the general framework of the mitzvot together. Zipporah entered with them, as did many converts from the mixed multitude.
So Rashi gives an answer. Rashi explains the distinction. Moses married his wife Tzipporah well before the whole Sinai experience. In other words, let's be very clear here.
Right.
Before the Torah was given, before Jewish law was given, before even the Jewish people officially became a nation with a law, with a governance, prohibiting idolatry, etc. And etc. Right. and other things. So you have here Moses, who marries Tzipporah well before any of these laws would come into play. And at Sinai, everyone at that point was essentially converted, or those that were there, right? Converted to Judaism, accepting Torah. When the Jews collectively said, Nasa, Vinishma, we're ready to accept the Torah. And then they got the Torah at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai. They got the law. At that point, they all converted, Tzipporah included, the mixed multitude from Egypt included. And the truth is, the children of Israel also included, because at that point, because until then, they weren't officially Jews, and now they were Jews, bound by Jewish law. So it was all new. And so that is the simple answer. Another answer could be, and along the lines of, I think, Yaakov, what we said a moment ago, is that presumably when Moses marries Tzipporah, presumably she adopts his traditions. I mean, right? Which essentially, even though it was before Sinai, we can call that a conversion. In this case, he grabs this Midianite woman, Zimri does, right? Schleps her out of her home, her tent, whatever it is, brings her before Moses and says, is she permitted? The obvious answer is no. How about you? She converted, she was on board, she wanted it, she accepted Torah and mitzvot, she was at Mount Sinai with everyone else. What kind of parallel are you drawing? Are you with me on this? In other words, Moses has a very basic answer. When faced with his accusation, how could you're telling us that this is forbidden, right? This whole experience of, being with these Midianite women and the idolatrous practices, etc. You're saying it's forbidden. What about you? Moses could have simply answered, there's no comparison. Which begs the question, why was Moses silent? Why didn't he answer this? Why didn't he give this response? This question is enhanced by text number 3. The Yalkut Ruveni. Take a look at what he writes in text number 3. Toba, I'll ask you to read this. Give me a quick second to pull this up. Please take it away.
He should at least have answered Zimri. He could have said, Halacha came into force when the Torah was given, or I converted her. Then perhaps Zimri would have responded and returned in Teshuvah, and God accepts all returnees.
If Moses had a good answer about how he was permitted to marry his own wife, Tzipporah, who was also a Midianite, a young Midianite woman when he married her. If there's an answer, right? Either she converted before we got married, or the whole concept of Torah law only came in by Mount Sinai and then we all accepted it together. If there's a response, he should have given it. He should have given it. And you know what? Maybe Zimri would have realized, you know what? It's a good point. I'm totally misguided. I have the wrong approach. And God would accept his tshuva, because God accepts all returnees. So again, the question on the table is, if Moses had a good answer, and he did have a good answer, why didn't he give it? Moses is silent. Everyone's crying. Pinchas picks up a spear, and he spears them both and ends the plague. But what? But why? What's going on over here? There's an accusation. This fellow is saying, Moses, you also married a Midianite idolatrous woman, and that's not factual. Why doesn't Moses respond? Why does he remain silent?
He usually waits, and I think in his mind, he always he doesn't want to get in it, because he doesn't want his ego in it. He doesn't want to be a spokesperson for God. He literally wants to present an answer, which is God's truth in you guys. And he always takes himself out of it, and he prays.
Saying he's trying not to get personal. He doesn't want to talk about his own personal life.
He doesn't ever defend. He rarely defends. Sometimes he gets mad and he'll like, how come you guys keep doing this? And it takes him 40 years to get this, but sometimes he does get this.
You're saying, but it's not about him. Okay.
But it's usually about, he's thinking, okay, this is God's law. These guys are rebelling. All right, what's the best tack to take? I'm not going to be, tell them what they already know. And then he finds a way for God to answer it versus he answers.
Okay.
He doesn't like
Hold that idea. We're gonna get to Richard.
I
Jump in.
thought maybe he knew that Zimri had no intention of getting an answer. He seemed to be intent on doing this for whatever reason. And I think I've heard, but I think incorrect. I'm thinking more about the Shabbos desecrator. I think he did it to show this is what you don't do. I'm not sure, but he was intent on doing it. He had no intention of listening to an answer. He didn't want an answer.
Okay, hold that thought. Hold that thought. We're going to come back to both what you and Yaakov said. We're going to come back to similar themes as we kind of go through this. But first, I want to introduce another layer of depth to this conversation, because according to the commentaries, and as we'll see, according to the Talmud, the issue wasn't so much this basic issue that we've covered so far, that Zimri brings this Midianite woman who's from an idolatrous nation, and he asks if she's permitted, and he says, and if you tell me no, then what about your own wife, Moses? And everybody gasps, and everyone cries, and Moses doesn't give an answer, and everyone panics, and then Pinchas saves the day. It wasn't so basic. It was a deeper accusation. It was even a more complex accusation. So let's explain. Let's explain. I want to preface this by saying that all of these rules that I'm about to lay out, they're all very well specified in the Torah, in the verses. The laws that I'm about to talk about are specifically to a Kohen. So a Kohen, there are restrictions on whom a Kohen can marry.
Almost no one.
So a Kohen, it says, the Torah says, cannot marry a grusha, a divorcee. A Kohen likewise cannot marry a gioret, a convert. But a Kohen can marry someone who is a widow. He can marry a widow. Okay, that's what the Torah says. Let me continue. A Kohen Gadol, a high priest. We don't have a Kohen today. We don't have a temple. We don't have the service of the temple. We don't have a Kohen Gadol. But these are the laws. These are original Torah law. The Torah says that a Kohen Gadol, the high priest, there's only one, right? The high priest back in the day could also not marry a widow. So a Kohen has restrictions about who they can and cannot marry. A Kohen Gadol, the high priest, has even more restrictions about who he can and cannot marry. So far, so good?
Mm-hmm.
Let's take a look at text 4. Okay, let's take a look at text 4. And here is how Maimonides puts these laws. Again, they don't come from Maimonides. They come from the Torah, but he writes it out nicely. Text 4 says the Rambam, a woman who converted or was freed from slavery, even if she converted or was freed when she was under 3 years of age, being that she is not a daughter of Israel, that doesn't mean literally that. She is forbidden to marry a Kohen. Not that she's not a daughter of Israel, but because she was converted or freed, etc., from slavery, so she is not she's not able to marry a Kohen, or a Kohen is not able to marry her. By the way, it's not like there's a rationale here. It's one of these what we would call a chok. It's one of these decrees. Why? Who knows why? But it's a prohibition against the Kohen. Now, let's continue. What was the status of Moses? All right, let's talk about this for a second. What was Moses? What tribe did Moses come from?
Levi.
The tribe of Levi. So the tribe of Levi. Good. If you recall, there were 3 siblings. Miriam was the oldest sister. Then you had Aaron, the next brother, and the baby of the family was Moses. All right, good. So Miriam, Aaron, Moses. Let's talk about the 2 brothers. Aaron, or Aharon, was what was his status?
High priest.
He was a Kohen, and the Kohen Gadol, the first high priest in history.
Yeah.
His sons were Kohanim. What about Moses? What are his sons? Levites. So by all accounts, we would say that Moses was a Levite. However, it gets a little bit more complicated than that. Let's take a look at text number 5. Let's take a look at text number 5 from the Talmud. All right, Sandrine, please read this one.
Rav said, Moses, our teacher, was a high priest and would receive a share of offering consecrated to heaven, as it says. It was Moses' portion of the ram of inauguration. Priesthood only expired for Moses' descendant, as it says. But as for Moses, the man of God, his son are named among the tribe of Levi. Yet it also said Moses and Aaron among his priests, and Samuel among those that call upon his name.
So thank you. Let me explain this piece of Talmud from Tractate Zevachim 101b. The Torah tells us that when the Mishkan was first built, the Mishkan was the first iteration of the temple known as the tabernacle. Who's the one that put it together? Moses. Who's the one that brought the first offerings for the first 7 days of inauguration? It was Moses. Now, we know the law is that only a Kohen can bring the offerings. But the Torah tells us this is the end of the book of Exodus. Everyone knows the beginning of the book of Exodus. It's very exciting. You got 10 plagues and splittings of the sea. But at the end of the book of Exodus, I don't know. Actually, no, I think it's in the book of Leviticus.
Yeah.
In the book of Leviticus, I'm sorry. In the middle of the book of Leviticus, it talks about the inauguration of, no, it's built at the end of Exodus, but it's inaugurated in the next book, in the book of Leviticus. The book of Leviticus, it tells us that Moses put it up each day for 7 days for a full week. He put it up in the morning and he brought the offerings, and then he took it down at night and he did it for 7 days. And for those 7 days, he acted like a Kohen. And according to the Talmud, he never lost the status of a Kohen. In fact, it calls him a Kohen Gadol. Now, he wasn't an acting Kohen Gadol. He wasn't an acting Kohen after those 7 days of inauguration. And his sons were not priests. They were never Kohanim. His sons were Leviim. His sons were Levites. But he, says the Talmud, never lost the status from that point on as a Kohen. Now we understand a little bit more in depth. And what I'm doing now is taking you into a deeper Talmudic analysis of the challenge that Zimri posed to Moses. Zimri says to Moses, how is your wife permitted to you? And we asked before, what kind of crazy question is that? She converted to Judaism, either before they got married or at Sinai. But now we understand that that doesn't fully answer the question. Because if Moses is a Kohen, are you with me? Stick with the question. If Moses has the status of a Kohen, guess what? He still can't marry Tzipporah, because even though she converted to Judaism, even though she converted to the monotheistic faith of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, she nonetheless has the status of a convert. And for a Kohen, that is not okay. That's not allowed.
But the reason she was allowed was because this all happened before Sinai.
Right.
So why doesn't that?
Oh, but at some point he became a Kohen. He became a Kohen. So maybe he should have had the divorce. So you're onto the answer. That's the answer. But let me build up the question first. Right. So the question, so Zimri comes to Moses and says, is she permitted to me? He doesn't mean without conversion. Actually, he was a Levi. All right, we have to figure out how it fits into words. But according to some commentators, this was the question. Is she permitted to me? And if not, what about your own wife, Moses? What about, look in the mirror, my friend. Who did you marry? Tzipporah. Oh, so how is she permitted? You're going to say she converted? You're a Kohen, bro. I'm sure he left out the word bro, or maybe not. You're a Kohen. Huh? You can't, you can't marry her. What's up with that? So Toba has the answer. What's Toba's answer? Toba's answer is 1 second.
We were all non-Jews.
Well, also, that is a good point. No, but right, none of us were Jewish. But Toba's answer is when he married her, he wasn't the Kohen. He only gained the Kohanic status afterwards. Now, but here's the question: do we say that if you start off not as a Kohen, you became a Kohen, which is impossible? That somehow that it doesn't affect the marriage or relationship, or not? It would be impossible to have another scenario like that where you start off as a Levi and become a Kohen. But the only other scenario, the only parallel would be, imagine a Kohen. Listen to this. Listen to this scenario. Let me blow your mind for a second. Imagine a Kohen, a regular Kohen, right? Sam Katz, we'll call him. Samuel Katz, right? Regular Kohen dude. Marries an almana. That's a widow. Kosher, totally kosher, allowed to marry a widow.
Widow Douglas?
1 second. And then 10 years later, they're happily married. 10 years later, he gets appointed as the Kohen Gadol. And a Kohen Gadol can't marry a widow. Uh-oh. Now what? Can he stay married or not? The good news is you and I don't have to theorize about it, because the Talmud asks this question and the Talmud addresses it. This is text number 6. You can't make this up. Why would you want to? You can't make this up. This is amazing. All right, let's take a look. This is text number 6. Who are we up to? Who just read? Sandrine, did you just read?
Yeah.
Okay, Yaakov, text 6, Talmud Tractate Yevamot.
A priest who betrothed a widow and was appointed to be the high priest may marry her. There was an incident with Yehoshua ben Gamla, who betrothed Marta bat Beitot, who was a widow, and the king appointed him as the high priest, and yet he still married.
So here it doesn't talk about a case where he married her and then he became a high priest. Can he still say married? But where they had Erison and not Nisuyin. I should have probably specified that what those two things are: betrothal and marriage. Under the chuppah, if you've been to a Jewish wedding, if you recall what happens at a Jewish wedding, so you'll recall that the rabbi tries to crack a few jokes. Okay, fine, that's just me. No, but so you're under the chuppah, and there's the first glass of wine, and there's the ring is placed, and then there's a glass of wine, and then they drink it, right? There's the ring ceremony. Then you have, and a few blessings and wine. Then you have the ketubah, you read the ketubah, and then you have the 7 blessings, the Shever Brachot, the 7 blessings, followed by more wine and the breaking of the glass. That's oh no, you circle before that, but that's before. So that's okay. So that's the basic overview. And then you're wondering, why does it take 30 minutes? I don't know. It really conceptually could take 5 minutes, shotgun wedding. When I do shotgun weddings, I just put on my Elvis sideburns, my blue suede shoes. I got some flare pants. Flare pants? That's not even a thing, right? Whatever. No, but no one called flare pants. I'm sure there's a better word than that. Anyway, back to the story. So here's what's going on. So under the chuppah, the first half of the chuppah is called erison, which is betrothal. The second half of the chuppah is called nisuyin, which is the marriage. Back in the day, not that long ago, but centuries ago, they used to, in Jewish practice was that these two acts of marriage were separated by a full year. A couple would do the erison, the ring, and the blessings with witnesses. At that point, they were exclusive to each other. They could not be with they were not allowed to be with anyone else. They were also not yet permitted to each other until you do the second half of the chuppah, but they were now designated for each other. They would do that for a year. It's basically what we would call like a hard engagement. Instead of an engagement that's like, oh, we'll get married. Sure. This was like binding. When I say binding, meaning like to break it, you would need to actually get at that point, even though they can't live together, but you would have to have a get, i.e. a divorce, to break it. So it was like a stronger locked in commitment of this. It's basically a strong engagement. And then they would work on the wedding arrangements and the money and the dowries and the donkeys and
Camels.
the chickens. And then they would have the chuppah ceremony, and then that was it. They were married a year later. It was traditionally a year. That's a long story. But here's the point. The point is, what happens if he does the erison? They do the betrothal, the first half, and he's a Kohen. But in the middle of the year, he gets appointed to be a high priest. Yeah. Can you go ahead with the marriage? Yeah, you can. Because when it started, this was your point, Toba, right? When you started, it was kosher. So Moses says, see, I filled the role of a Kohen. I became a Kohen. But I didn't start off as a Kohen. I married her as a non-Kohen. So she's a Gioris, a convert. Great. I married her as a non-high priest.
As a Levite.
Sorry, as a non-priest. I'm saying, forget high priest. As a non-priest, as a Levite from the tribe of Levi. It was kosher then. The status doesn't change. Make sense? Yeah.
All right. So is there a spot in the Torah that we see God saying, Aaron, you are a Kohen?
Yeah.
Okay. And then does he say that to Moses when he says, build the Mishkan?
No, but he tells Moses, he doesn't officially proclaim him a Kohen. God tells Moses, your brother will and his sons will be Kohanim. Your brother will be the high priest. All that is clear. Okay. God also tells Moses that your sons will be Levites. But what about Moses himself? It's not so clear. So again, some commentators say in the Talmud, we have one Talmudic source that we read before. The Talmud says that the moment that he was appointed by God to run the show for a week with the sacrifice and everything, that's the moment that he was essentially designated a Kohen. And once you're a Kohen, I mean, like, hashtag Kohen for life. Print up the t-shirts, get them on Etsy. Let's go. Let's roll. Right. So the point is, so now, yeah.
The question is not like, can he become a Kohen? The question
Right.
goes to, can he stay with his wife?
Can he stay with his wife? Right. So did he become a Kohen? The answer is yes. Once he becomes a Kohen, what about his marriage? As we learned from a Kohen who becomes a Kohen Gadol, a change of status doesn't retroactively mess up what started off in a kosher way. And thus we say that since Moses marries Tzipporah, and she converted either right away or at Sinai, either way, she converted, not a problem. So there's no question about the marriage. He becomes a Kohen later on. Good for him. Good for him. Bake him a cake or not, or order one from Publix. But either way, their marriage is fine. So when Zimri, let's put everything back into the bigger picture context. Zimri, who is the leader of the tribe of Shimon, he comes to Moses. He's schlepping this young lady, Cosby, from this Midianite woman who is, again, they were all steeped in idolatrous practices. He says, aha, is she permitted? And if you say no, what about your own wife? It's not simply because she is a Midianite, a pagan Midianitess. It's really what on a deeper level or on a more intricate level, the accusation being leveled against Moses is that even conceding the fact that your wife converted to Judaism, that Tzipporah converted to Judaism, 100% Jewish, but you're a Kohen, and a Kohen can't marry a garish, a convert, and the answer to that is they got married before he became a Kohen, which means that it's kosher, no issue with Moses' wife or marriage, family, relationship, everything is kosher.
His grandmother did.
Yeah, exactly. So now the question is, once again, so if there was an answer, why was Moses silent? Again, however you explain the question, we have it now on two different layers of depth, but however you explain the question that Zimri, lobs at Moses in front of this crowd's mouth, the collective jaws are dropped against this accusation. Who would have such chutzpah to challenge Moses? I mean, I guess you read the Torah, plenty of people, but yeah, everybody, take a number, get to the back of the line in my bakery of complaints, right? I just say bakery because that's the only context that I've ever taken a number, I think. Well, no, the government buildings and in bakery in Squirrel Hill, back in Pastries Unlimited on Murray Avenue. But back to the story. So what's the bottom line? If Moses had a good answer, she converted. I married her before I was a Kohen. Whatever the question is, if he had a good answer, why doesn't he give the answer? He leads the people to panic. He leads Pinchas to do something, desperate act. Why not just give the answer? And now we come to the big idea of today's class. And you mentioned it, Yaakov, and Richard, you mentioned it. And I alluded to it in my email, sounds of silence. And by the way, I'm such a rabbit hole guy. Oh, I love researching things. So I'm like, is it sound of silence or sounds of silence?
Sound.
Oh, my friends, welcome to my rabbit hole. We have a punchline to get to, but I do feel like I'm going to segue for a quick second into Paul Simon. So I'm like, is it, because I wrote the email, I'm like, sounds of silence. No, is it sound of silence or sounds of silence? So I look it up. I'm like, sound or sounds of silence? Question mark. Google's brilliant. There's a lot of stuff it could do better and more ethically. However, when you type in this stuff, it comes up, man. Does it come up? Somebody does a deep dive, and somebody in the comments on that deep dive links one of the original recordings, acoustic recording of Paul Simon singing sound or sounds of silence. And listen to this. It's clear the first 2 or 3 times. Did someone knock on the door? Yaakov, if you could, thank you. It's clear the first 2 or 3 times in the song, he says sound of silence. But the last time, he says sounds of silence, plural. The way it was initially published, the initial record about publishing, sounds, plural. So, my friends, that's why my email went through multiple iterations. Sounds, then sound, then sounds again. Sounds of silence. And now we get to the original point, what I wrote in the email and what was mentioned also, Richard, you mentioned this. Sometimes a question deserves and demands a reply. Some questions you have to answer. Some questions you must answer. That's the same thing as have to, right? However, some questions you must not answer. Sometimes, like that old song, know when to hold him, know when to fold him, know when to walk away, know when to run. Sitting at the table, right? So
Clearly, you are the only person that can combine Kenny Rogers with Paul Simon.
See that? You see that? Maybe they'll do a tour. Are they both still with us?
Yeah.
No,
Kenny Rogers passed years ago.
The heck with it if you can.
Well, there's always AI. There's always AI. Just ask Tupac. Oh, Tupac also gets a mention. So here's the point. Some questions you got to answer. Not because you're obligated, because they deserve an answer. But sometimes questions don't deserve an answer. The previous Rebbe once said, it's not in the text here, but it just came to me, this recollection. He once said, some people ask questions to get an answer. And some people ask questions, and the question itself is their answer. Let me explain that for a second. Hey, sometimes a person says, why is it like this? And they're not looking for an answer. They're looking to justify their own behavior, right? They're asking a question. The question is their answer, their excuse.
Right.
It's like, why am I going to do this? Why are you not doing that? Right? So the question is an answer. When Zimri comes to Moses and says, is she permitted to me? And if you say no, what about your own wife? Is it a good faith question?
No.
Of course not. Is he looking? It's an attack. Is he looking for an answer? Of course he's not looking for an answer. So to answer it is to justify it. Let's go through the text. This is actually, this insight comes from the Rebbe. The Rebbe gives this perspective, and it's really powerful. Tob, I think we are up to you. Yeah. This is like the key text of today's class. Text number 7, take it away.
We do not always seek to answer the question of others. Sometimes their question can be so impertinent as to make a Midianite seem permitted. When the other person honestly intends for the sake of heaven, we must answer even a fool according to their foolishness. But if the other person poses a question in Torah terms with the intention of permitting what the Torah forbids, we must take the approach of do not answer a fool according to their foolishness. Victory is achieved over such an opponent not by engaging in rational debate, but by displaying logic-defying strength.
Thank you. And I have to cite, look at the 2 verses, Proverbs and Proverbs. Look at that. Look at those numbers, 26:4 and 26:5. And I don't know if you noticed this, but it's stunning. Let's skip to text 9 for a second. I'm going to read this, text 9. These are the 2 verses from Proverbs that we just read inside the text, the quote from the Rebbe. But look at this in context. Look at verse 4. Do not answer a fool according to his or her folly, lest you become like them. 5. Answer a fool according to their folly, lest they be wise in their sight. Well, one second. What does this mean? Text 4 says, don't answer a fool according to their folly. Text 5 says, answer a fool according to their folly. Hello, can I get some advice here? Can I get some guidance? In fact, this led the sages in text 10a to almost want to ban the book of Proverbs. Text 10a from Tractate Shabbat. They sought to suppress the book of Proverbs. 2, because its statements contradict each other. And what are its statements that contradict one another? It's written answer not a fool according to their folly, and it's written answer a fool according to their folly. In other words, the contradiction in Proverbs was so blatant, and this is one example, the 2 verses that we are juxtaposing against each other. The contradiction was so so stark that the sages almost wanted, or were thinking about considering banning the book. I don't know, banning the book, but it's like saying, it's not a book that you should study because you're not going to get anything from it. But what do the commentators explain? The commentators explain that there's no contradiction. One verse says, answer the fool. Sorry, one verse says, don't answer the fool. And the other verse says, answer the fool. What's the difference?
The intention of the question.
The intention of the question. And that's what text said, what you read before, Tova, from the Rebbe, text 7. The Rebbe answers that question. And the commentaries, and it's based, of course, on classic commentaries on the book of Proverbs. And so the Rebbe says, when the person is coming with a good faith question, person has an honest and sincere question. It might be a foolish question, right? But it's a sincere question. So it's a good question. You have to answer the question. And you know what somebody will say? You know what the answer will say? Or the one being asked will say? There's no such thing as a foolish question. You ask a good question, even though it's basic, even though the premise might be misconstrued, doesn't matter. If it's a good faith question, then it deserves a good faith answer. Even if the question is not the brightest question, not the brightest bulb of questions. Fine. But what if the question is coming from a place of disingenuousness? What if it's coming from a place of mockery, derision, attack, cynicism? What if the question, as I said before, is an attempt to give an answer, an excuse, or justification? I'm asking a question, not as a question, but hurling an accusation. What happens then? Then Proverbs says, King Solomon, the wise of men, says, don't answer the fool according to his or her foolishness. Don't give an answer, because by giving an answer, now you are elevating the question to be a valid question, no matter how you answer. Even if you think that your answer is dismissing the question and wiping the floor with the question, guess what? The fact that you engage in the conversation means that you've justified the question. This was on the greatest display a few months ago when Israel showed up to the court, international court, to defend itself. Remember that? Israel's accused of genocide. So instead of saying, Shkoyach, thank you very much, have a great day.
Yeah.
Thanks for trying. Israel shows up. It's not a genocide. It is a genocide. No, this is why. That's why. Guess what?
Yeah.
You'll never win that argument. You'll never win that. You'll never win that argument. You're going to end up looking like you're guilty. That's why you showed up. You're guilty. You know you're guilty. You showed up. You try to defend yourself. You try to defend yourself. That's what King Solomon says when you're dealing with a foolish question, not just any foolish question, a question that's coming from a place of ill or evil intent. You're best off not addressing the question. Because if you address the question, no matter how brilliant your response is, no matter how good your lawyers are, people are going to say the other side won. That's how it always works. What happens? Zimri comes to Moses in front of the Jewish people. He schleps this young woman, Cosby. Yeah, literally by her hair, right? Horrible, right? Dragging this person, right? This woman in. Is she permitted? And if you say no, what about you? What about your wife? What about your family, your marriage, your relationship? And however you explain the question, whether it's because she had converted or because he was a Kohen, however you explain the question, it's not a question, it's an accusation. If Moses stoops down to the level of defending himself, like Richard said, and like Yaakov said, you've lost the plot. The moment you get into it, you've lost the plot. My friends, there's so much application. I mentioned the Israel application. Have you, I sound like an infomercial. Have you ever read an article, maybe Washington Post, where they have comments? Like the New York Times oftentimes does not have the comments enabled, but Washington Post, I think, pretty much always has the comments enabled, or very often, and found yourself becoming infuriated by the comments on Israel articles and wanting to create an account just to counteract that? I'm speaking for myself here for a second, right? And then you realize there's no point. There's no point. There's no point. And someone could say, no, there is a point. Because let it be challenged on the record. Let every article at least be challenged, at least have, and I can't argue with it. But if you think you're going to convince anyone out of it by giving a brilliant answer, the guy that's the hater, you're going to convince them out of it because you're going to write a brilliant response. I have news for you. That's not going to happen. Moses reminds us that sometimes silence is the only legitimate response because responding gives the claim legitimacy. Silence is a way of saying we're not even operating in the same conversation. We're not even having a conversation on this. There's nothing to talk about. Garnished to Zagan. There's nothing to talk about on this topic. This is the example that Moses set, and I want to end on a more, I would say, internal application level. Again, there are more texts. If you have the book, there's like 5 more texts that break this down further, but it's basically all the same points. You got everything. But I do want to end with this, an internal application. Sometimes the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, the animal soul, the lower self, the inner lower self, comes to us, shares its opinion and says, "Hey, why don't we try this? Why don't we do that? What's wrong?" And if you tell me that it's wrong, well, then how about this? How about the other? If you start answering that voice, guess what? It got you. Hook, line, and sinker. The moment you engage is the moment you're in. That's it. That's it. The moment you engage is the moment that you've been got. In the book of Tanya, he says that internally, life is a wrestling match between our higher self and our lower self. Like there's this constant struggle. He says, "Kol hamisabek im menuvel misnavel." If you wrestle with someone who is filthy, you become filthy. You wrestle with it, that's it. So you have, let's say, maybe a more practical example. You're trying to daven or do something else, pray or do something else that's a higher experience. Maybe study something, meditate on something, pray, and you have this distracting thought that's disturbing, that's interrupting wherever you're trying to be. You say, you know what? Let me fight with this thought. Let me fight with it and try to wrestle it down and put the old the full Nelson on it. Trying to remember my old 1980s WWF wrestling moves, right? Pile driver, little Randy Macho Man Savage, whatever he used to do, right? Leg kick drop, right? Those were the days, right? Jake the Snake Roberts. Like, let's think about what these guys, Hulk Hogan, what would these guys do?
Before that,
right?
Man Mountain Mike.
I don't know Man Mountain Mike.
He was way early.
That's before my time.
Goldberg.
Goldberg. Oh yeah. Ric Flair. Yeah. He was good. Hulk Hogan, obviously. The Undertaker. Oh, I mean, my God. This is like epic. All right, sorry. Let's get back. So if you wrestle with the thought, guess what? Mission accomplished on that side. It got you. You're now more distracted than ever. You're engaged, you're invested in it. It got you, and it got you good. The best advice, ignore it. Move on. The moment you attack it, it got you. Mission, it got you where it wanted. I gotta continue with this. I'm sorry. I need a few more minutes. It's not even in the text. These are all related ideas. This book. The Rebbe said countless times in letters to countless people. And it's sourced in other sources in Jewish thought. The aim of the evil inclination is really, it's not about the sin. It's about the guilt that you'll have from committing the sin. In other words, we always think that the evil inclination wants you to sin because sin is bad. You know what's worse than sin? Feeling bad about sin. You're like, feeling bad about sin? How's that bad? That's good. That means you have a conscience, right? That means you have a moral compass. Of course you should feel bad. That's what you think. The Yetzer Hara wants you to feel bad. You know why? Because when you feel bad, and you identify, I am a bad person for doing bad things, you're more likely to do the next bad thing. The best advice, if you've done something wrong, is move forward. It doesn't mean to not apologize. It doesn't mean Yom Kippur not to show up and do your thing with the al chet this, al chet that. Yes. But if you're obsessed with the problem, you're stuck in the problem. That's the point. The best advice is what the Rebbe calls Hesach Hadas, which means dealing with it later.
Get back on track.
We'll deal with it. Get back on track. Get back on. You feel guilty, right? You're trying to eat healthier, and then you slip up and say, I can't. Again, I'm a terrible person. I'm no good at this. Guess what? Now you're toast. Just move forward. As he waves around the pastries. Anyway, what's the moral of the story, my friends? The moral of the story is sometimes, not always, but sometimes, like Nike used to say, be like Mike. Torah says, be like Moses. Be like Moses, which means sometimes you don't need to answer because the answer means that you've been got. And who wants to get got? Not me. All right, my friends, thank you very much for joining me tonight for Torah Studies Extended Edition. Thank you very much for joining. I hope you enjoyed the class and the insights and the lessons and the brilliance of Torah, because it is nothing but brilliant. I also want to mention a few quick announcements. Number one, I keep on mentioning this book. We will have an author's presentation and the editor's presentation. That's me. Author's presentation, probably in about a month or so. In the next 4 to 6 weeks, we'll be having this event, Letters for Life. You can get a book, get it signed, meet the author. He's going to talk about the book.
Where do you get a book?
You get these books from the publisher, kehat.com, KEHOT.com, Chabad.org. They're selling it also because it does have Chabad.org's logo on the back, as you can see. The director of Chabad.org's son is the one who wrote this book, so hence the Chabad.org branding on it. You can also get it on Amazon, or as I like to call it, Amazon. They have their Prime sale, and I'm sure it's not featured on that because, they're pushing their own stuff. But you can get it on Prime and your local bookstore if you ask them to carry it. I'm sure they will. So that's that. Yes.
I just wanted to say thank you for the lesson. I loved it. It was very good. And I actually needed to hear that today.
Well,
So thank you.
Thank you for the thank you. And I will say, oftentimes with Torah, it comes right at the right moment, and it's always timely. Also, election 2024. Nonpartisan look at the issues, the biggest issues facing our country, coming up August 19th. Also, we're doing Journey of the Soul. Well, we're all doing Journey of the Soul, but we'll be learning about Journey of the Soul, a look into life, death, and the afterlife, reincarnation, heaven and hell, and everything related to souls. That is coming up also next month in August. So that's Wednesday.
Wednesday night.
The election 2024 is Monday. So you have Monday, Wednesday. I have a new seminar, a multimedia seminar that we're working on called How Israel Wins. I'm just putting the final touches on that. We're going to get that out there hopefully this week. We have a new, anyway, we got a lot of stuff. All right, I'm not gonna go through the whole list, but I so want to, but I won't, because sometimes silence is golden. Thank you very much
For someone to get on all the programs and all the
Yes.
classes, it would just be like Torah Center, is it .org?
The Torah Center ATL.org. The Torah Center ATL.org. Or just email or text me. I'll send the digits. By the way, I do want to set up, I think it would be good to do a WhatsApp group. That way I could post like the classes, the audio, the video links. No?
Yeah.
Yeah, another WhatsApp.
I mean, it's obviously opt in, opt out. No one will be spammed. Anyway, good. See y'all. Have a good night. And hope this resonated. Good to see you guys.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you.